Hello everyone. Today we will continue with the chapter The Enemy. This is the fifth part of the chapter. Those who have not seen the earlier parts may go and see them. Then only you will be able to understand this fifth part. So let us begin with the explanation of this chapter. Last time we read where general he said that the best solution was to kill that prisoner of war quietly, and he also said that he would send two killers to Sadao's house on that particular night, and he wanted Sadao to act naturally and keep the door of the outer partition of the man's room open, and Sadao agreed that the idea it seemed natural to him, and he added that they did leave the door of the outer partition open at night. So, to this, what General said, good, the General said, yawning. They are very capable assassins. They make no noise and they know the trick of inward bleeding. If you like, I can even have them remove the body. So, General, he was over with the talk and so he yawned to show disinterest. He added that was a good thing. He commented that the killers, they were experts, they did not make any noise and killed the person in such a way that he bled inside. There would be no traces of blood on his body. He would even ask them to remove the dead body if Sadao wanted. Sadao considered, means he thought, that perhaps would be best, Excellency. He agreed, thinking of Hannah. So he thought about Hannah and said that it would be very good. He left the general's presence then and went home, thinking over the plan. In this way, the whole thing would be taken out of his hands. So Sadao he went back home and on the way he kept on thinking of the plan that he had made along with the general. He would tell Hannah nothing, since she would be timid, means fearful, at the idea of assassins in the house, and yet, certainly, such persons were essential in an absolute state such as Japan was. Absolute state means a state run by kings having total powers. How else could rulers deal with those who opposed them? So, what he thought that in this way he would not be involved in the death of that American man, and he also planned that he would not tell Hannah anything about this uh, plan. Hannah would not like the idea of the hired killers coming to their house, but um, Sadao thought that such persons they were essential in a place like Japan, and it was the only way for the rulers to deal with their opponents. He refused to allow anything but reason to be atmosphere of his mind as he went into the room where the American was in bed. Reason means an idea backed by common sense. So Sadao, he did not let any thought enter his mind as he went into the room where the American man lay asleep. But as he opened the door to his surprise, he found the young man out of bed and preparing to go into the garden. So as he entered the room, he was surprised to see the man. He was out of his bed and was getting ready to go out into the garden. What is this? He exclaimed. Who gave you permission to leave your room? Sada was shocked as he asked him that who had permitted him to stand and walk. I am not used to waiting for permission, Tom said gaily. Gaily means cheerfully, happily. Gosh, I feel pretty good again, but will the muscles on this side always feel stiff? So Tom was happy and said that he was not in the habit of taking permission before doing anything. And he said that he felt good again, but the muscles on the sides of his body they were stiff and rigid. Is it so? Sadao inquired, surprised. He forgot all else. Now I thought I had provided against that, he murmured. He lifted the edge of the man's shirt and gazed at the healing scar. Massage may do it, he said, if exercise does not. So, Sadao, he was surprised to hear that the muscles on the sides of Tom's body were stiff and rigid, and he forgot all work and said that he had warned the man not to stand and walk. He lifted the man's shirt and inspected the scar. He said that massage could heal it if it could not be healed by exercise. It won't bother me much, the young man said. His young face was gaunt. Gaunt means weak under the stubbly blonde beard. Stubbly means unshaven, blonde, yellowish color beard. Say, doctor, I have got something I want to say to you. If I hadn't met a Jap like you, well, I wouldn't be alive today. I know that. Sadao bowed, but he could not speak. So that man, he said that the scar it would not trouble him, and his young bearded face was weak. He thanked Sadao and said that if he had not reached Sadao that day, then he would have died. So he says that if I hadn't met a Jap like you means a Japanese person like you, then he wouldn't have survived today. Sure, I know that, Tom went on warmly. His big, thin hands gripping a chair were white at the knuckles. Gripping means holding tightly. I guess if all the Japs were like you, there wouldn't have been a war. So Tom added to his words that he was sure of that he wouldn't have survived if he hadn't reached Sadao's place. As he held the chair tightly with his thin hands, the knuckle turned white in color. Knuckle, I hope you all know it. This indicated that he was still weak and had not recovered fully. Tom added that if all the Japanese people would have been like Sadao, then the war would not have happened. Perhaps, Sadao said with difficulty. And now I think you had better go back to bed. So Sadao he said that maybe it was quite possible, but he added that the man should go to sleep. He should go and take rest as he was not perfectly fit to stand and move around. He helped the boy back into bed and then bowed. Good night, he said. Sadao slept badly that night. Time and time again he woke, thinking he heard the rustling of footsteps. Rustling means the sound that is made by footsteps. The sound of a twig. Twig means branch of a tree broken or a stone displaced in the garden, a noise such as men might make who carried a burden. Burden here means dead body. So Sadao he was restless all through the night as he felt that the hired killers were there to kill the man. He imagined hearing the sound of footsteps, branches being broken, stones moving as men walked on them, and imagined that he heard such a noise which indicated that some men were carrying the American's dead body. All this anxiety kept him awake. The next morning, he made the excuse to go first into the guest room. If the American were gone, he then could simply tell Hannah that so the general had directed. But when he opened the door, he saw at once that there on the pillow was the shaggy, means hairy blonde head. He could hear the peaceful breathing of sleep, and he closed the door again quietly. So in the morning, Sadao made an excuse to go into the American's man's room first. He had planned that if the man was gone, then he would tell Hannah that the general had ordered for him to be removed from there. When he opened the door, he saw the man who had lots of yellowish colored hair was asleep. He could hear the sound of his breathing. Sadao closed the door of the room. He is asleep, he told Hannah. He is almost well to sleep like that. So he told Hannah that the man was sleeping and he was well and did not need to sleep like that. What shall we do with him? Hannah whispered her old refrain. Refrain means which is repeated time and again. So she has been asking this right from the beginning of the chapter, and again she asked that what shall we do with him. Sadao shook his head. I must decide in a day or two, he promised. So he promised her that he would decide in a day or two that they will do with this man. But certainly, he thought, the second night must be the night. There rose a wind that night, and he listened to the sounds of bending boughs. Boughs means branches of trees, and whistling partitions means the structures dividing a room into parts. So Sadao he thought that perhaps the killers they would come the next night, the second night. The night was windy. He heard the sounds made by the branches as they bent due to the wind, and the partitions made whistling sound as the wind passed through them. Hannah woke too. Ought we not to go and close the sick man's partition? She asked. So she asked that aren't they should close the partition door of the man's room? No, Sadao said. He is now he is able now to do it for himself. So he refused her and said that the man was capable to do that himself. But the next morning, the American was still there. Then the third night, of course, must be the night. The wind changed to quiet rain, and the garden was full of the sound of dripping eaves and running springs. Eaves here is a part of the roof that meets or overhangs the wall of a building, and springs are tiny rivulets, small streams of water. So, running Spring Sadao slept a little better, but he woke at the sound of a crash and leaped to his feet. So, on the third night, Sadao was hopeful that they might come, but instead of the wind, there was rain that night. The garden was full of noises as the water dripped down the roof and tiny rivulets flowed through the garden. Sadao slept a little and jumped as he heard a loud noise. What was that? Hannah cried. The baby woke at her voice and began to wail. Wail means cry. I must go and see. But he held her and would not let her move. Sadao, she cried, what is the matter with you? Don't go, he muttered, don't go. His terror infected her and she stood breathless, waiting. There was only silence. Together they crept back into the bed. Crept means crawl back, means again lie down. The baby between them. So Hannah, she heard the loud crash and she asked what it was. Even the baby also woke up and started crying. Hannah wanted to go and check on it, but Sadao stopped her. Hannah screamed at him and asked what the matter was. Sadao spoke slowly and asked her not to go. He was scared, and his scare affected Hannah too. She stood without breathing and waited. There was silence, and both of them crawled back into the bed with the baby lying on the bed in between them. Yet, when he opened the door of the guest room in the morning, there was the young man. He was very gay, gay means happy, and had already washed, means bathed, and was now on his feet. He had asked for a razor yesterday and had shaved himself, and today there was a faint color in his cheeks. Faint color in his cheeks means his pale yellow colored cheeks, they were turning pinkish in color, which indicated that he was recovering. So in the morning, Sadao went into the guest room and saw the man was there. He was happy and had taken his bath and had started moving around. He had borrowed her razor from Sadao the previous day and had shaved his beard. Now, the color of his cheeks was slightly pinkish, which indicated that he was recovering and regaining good health. I am well, he said joyously. So, man, he announced happily that he was well, he was healthy. Sadao drew his kimono Around his weary body, weary means tired, he could not, he decided suddenly, go through another night. It was not that he cared for this young man's life, no, simply it was not worth the strain. Strain here means stress. So Sadao, he wrapped his traditional Japanese gown around his tired body. He was tired because the curiosity had kept him awake for 2 consecutive nights. He decided that he could not pass one more night in such a way. He was not bothered about the man's life, but he could not bear the stress and anxiety any longer. You are well, Sadao agreed. He lowered his voice. You are so well that I think if I put my boat on the shore tonight with food and extra clothing in it, you might be able to row to that little island not far from the coast. It is so near the coast that it has not been worth fortifying. Fortifying means putting security at that place. So it is so near the coast that it was not considered right to put security at that place. Nobody lives on it because in storm it is submerged. So on that island, nobody lives on that island because it sinks into the sea when there is storm. But this is not the season of storm. You could live there until you saw a Korean fishing boat pass. They pass quite near the island because the water is many fathoms deep there. Fathoms, it's a unit of measuring the depth of the sea. So it is very deep over that place. So in this para, what Sadao said, he said to the man that he was well now. Lowering his voice, he said that he was strong enough to sail a boat. Sadao planned that if he arranged a boat, stock it with food and extra clothing, the man would be able to row it to the nearby island. As the island was so close to the coast, so it had not been guarded, no security was put over there. It was not inhabited as it sunk into the sea during the storms. As it was not the season of storms at that time, the man could live on the island until he spotted a Korean fishing boat pass by. The Korean fishing boats they passed near the island as the sea was very deep there. The young man stared at him, slowly comprehending. Do I have to? He asked. I think so, Sadao said gently. You understand it. It is not hidden that you are here. The young man nodded in perfect comprehension. Okay, he said simply. Comprehending means understanding. So the young man he stared Sadao as he understood his words. He asked that was it necessary for him to do so? Sadao pleaded that he must understand the fact that the man was living at his house was known to everyone. The young man agreed with him and said okay. He moved his head to indicate his acceptance. Sadao did not see him again until evening. As soon as it was dark, he had dragged the stout boat down to the shore. Stout means fat, big, and in it he put food and bottled water that he had bought secretly during the day. So, stout boat, I'll show you the picture. You can see over here this a kind of a boat like this only. So, that was taken out and it was filled with or stocked with food and water, uh, as well as 2 quilts he had bought at a pawn shop. Pawn shop is a store that lends money in exchange for a valuable thing that they can sell if the person leaving. It does not pay an agreed amount of money by an agreed time, uh, or you can say a barter shop, you can say. So the boat he tied to a post in the water, for the tide was high. There was no moon and he worked without a flashlight. Flashlight means torch. So Sadao, after saying or after talking to the prisoner of war about his plan, he left and did not meet the young man until evening. During the day he made arrangements for him. As it became dark, Sadao pulled out a big boat to the shore. He placed food and bottled water in it that he had bought secretly during the day. He also kept two quilts in it. He had purchased them from the pawn shop. As there was a high tide in the sea, he tied the boat to a pole. It was a dark, moonless night, and Sadao worked without a torch. He did not want to be spotted by anyone. When he came to the house, he entered as though he were just back from his work, and so Hannah knew nothing. Yumi was here today, she said as she served him his supper. Supper is the evening meal. Though she was so modern, still she did not eat with him. Yumi cried over the baby. She went on with a sigh. She misses him so. So when Sadao came home, he pretended as though he had returned from work so that Hannah did not guess anything. Hannah served him the evening meal and said that Yumi had visited them that day as she missed the baby a lot. Although uh, Hannah, she was modern, but still she did not eat with Sadao. The servants will come back as soon as the foreigner is gone, Sadao said. So Sadao, he said that as soon as the American man left, the servants they would return. He went into the guest room that night before he went to bed himself and checked carefully the American's temperature, the state of the wound, and his heart and pulse. The pulse was irregular, but that was perhaps because of excitement. The young man's pale lips were pressed together and his eyes burned. Only the scars on his neck were red. So that night, before going to bed, Sadao visited the American man. He checked his body temperature, the wound, his heart, and heartbeat. The heartbeat was unsteady due to excitement as he was about to leave their home. The man's lips were pressed together and his eyes were red in color, which seemed to be burning with fire. The scars on his neck were still red as they had not healed yet. I realize you are saving my life again, he told Sadao. Not at all, Sadao said. It is only inconvenient to have you here any longer. So young man thought and said to Sadao that he was saving his life once again, but Sadao said that it was not like that. He was sending him because he could not keep him any longer. He had hesitated a good deal about giving the man a flashlight, but he had decided to give it to him after all. It was a small one, his own, which he used at night when he was called. So here Sadao, he was reluctant in giving him a torch as he felt that if the man used it unwisely, he could be spotted and land into trouble. Finally, he gave him his own torch, the one that he used when he had to attend to patients at night. If your food runs out means finishes, before you catch a boat, he said, signal me two flashes. At the same instant, the sun drops over the horizon. Sun drops mean the sun sets over the horizon. That is the line at which the earth's surface and the sky appear to meet. Do not signal in darkness, for it will be seen. If you are alright but still there, signal me once. You will find fresh fish easy to catch, but you must eat them raw, means uncooked. A fire would be seen. Okay, the young man breathed. So Sadao, he gave some instructions to this man. He said that if his stock of food finished before he found a Korean fishing boat, he could signal him with two flashes of the torch at dusk time. He asked him to be careful not to signal when it was dark because light was more visible in the dark as compared to dusk. He added that the man could find fish in the sea near the island, but he had to eat it raw. He was not supposed to cook it because fire would be spotted by the guards and put him in danger. The man drew a breath on hearing the instructions and said, okay. He was dressed now in the Japanese clothes which Sadao had given him, and at the last moment, Sadao wrapped a black cloth about his blond head. Now, Sadao said, so the man wore the traditional Japanese dress that Sadao gave him to wear, and Sadao wrapped a black cloth round his head to hide his golden colored hair. The young American, without a word, shook Sadao's hand warmly and then walked quite well across the floor and down the steps into the darkness of the garden. Once, twice, Sadao saw his light flash to find his way, but that would not be suspected. He waited until from the shore there was one more flash, then he closed the partition. That night he slept. So before leaving American Man, he shook hand with Sadao and walked away towards the boat. He used the torch twice to find his way, but the guards would not doubt that. Sadao waited till he saw the torchlight once more as the man boarded the boat. Sadao closed the door of the partition and slept well that night as he had finally got rid of the man. You say the man escaped, the general asked faintly. He had been operated upon a week before, an emergency operation to which Sadao had been called in the night. For 12 hours, Sadao had not been sure the general would live. The gallbladder was much involved. Now, a week ago, the general had been operated upon in an emergency in which Sadao took part. Sadao informed him that the man escaped. The general was weak as he was recovering from the operation. For 12 hours after the operation, his condition was critical, and Sadao was not sure that he would survive. They had operated upon his gall bladder. Then the old man had begun to breathe deeply again and to demand food. Sadao had not been able to ask about the assassin so far as he knew that they had never come. The servants had returned and Yumi had cleaned the guest room thoroughly and had burned sulfur in it to get the white man's smell out of it. Sulfur, a chemical element used as a disinfectant. Nobody said anything, only the gardener was cross, means disappointed, because he had got behind with his chrysanthemums. Chrysanthemums means the flowers, as you can see here in the picture. So, General was an old man, and after the operation, he started eating food and breathed deeply. Sadao did not have the courage to ask him what happened to the professional killers that he had promised to send to kill the American man. Sadao knew that the killers did not turn up ever, and at Sadao's home, things returned to normal. The servants returned. Yumi used sulfur to disinfect the room used by the American man. The servants did not speak anything. Gardner was annoyed because he had got late to plant the chrysanthemum flowers due to this incident. But after a week, Sadao felt the general was well enough to be spoken to about the prisoner. Yes, Excellency, he escaped, Sadao now said. He coughed, signifying that he had not said all he might have said, but was unwilling to disturb the general further. But the old man opened his eyes suddenly. So, after 1 week, Sadao felt that the general was well enough and he could discuss the American man with him. Sadao said that the man had escaped. He coughed up, which indicated that Sadao had not told him everything, as he did not want to disturb him. The general was reminded of his promise to send the professional killers, and he opened his eyes suddenly when he heard about the American man. That prisoner, he said with some energy. Did I not promise you I would kill him for you? So, General, he was reminded of his promise and asked Sadao that had he not promised him to get that man killed by his personal professional killers? You did, Excellency, Sadao said. Well, well, the old man said in a tone of amazement. So I did. But you see, I was suffering a good deal. The truth is, I thought of nothing but myself. In short, I forgot my promise to you. So Sadao, when he replied, yes, you had promised me, the general was surprised and said that he was suffering due to bad health and he had forgotten all about the promise that he had made. I wondered, Your Excellency, Sadao murmured. It was certainly very careless of me, the general said. But you understand, it was not lack of patriotism or dereliction of duty. Lack of patriotism. Patriotism is love for one's country, and dereliction of duty means neglect of duty. So he says that it was not out of patriotism or dereliction of duty, but he looked anxiously at his doctor to Sadao. If the matter should come out, you would understand that, wouldn't you? So when Sadao he spoke softly that he wondered that the general had forgotten his promise. General felt sorry that he had been careless. He added that it was neither that he did not love Japan nor that he was shirking or neglecting his duty. He looked at Sadao with curiosity as he sought support from him. He wondered that Sadao understood his problem. Certainly, Your Excellency, Sadao said. He suddenly comprehended that the general was in the palm of his hand and that as a consequence, he himself was perfectly safe. So here Sadao he said that he understood the general's position well, and he also understood that general was in his palm of his hand, means he had control over the general, and as a consequence means result of this he himself was perfectly safe, means Sadao was completely safe. I can swear to your loyalty, Excellency, he said to the old general, and to your zeal against the enemy. Zeal means enthusiasm. So, when Sadao understood that the general was in his control and as a result, Sadao was safe, so Sadao said that he could swear upon the general's loyalty towards Japan and his enthusiasm to fight the enemy. You are a good man, the general murmured and closed his eyes. You will be rewarded. But Sadao, searching the spot of black in the twilighted sea that night, had his reward. There was no prick of light in the dusk. No one was on the island. His prisoner was gone, safe, doubtless, for he had warned him to wait only for a Korean fishing boat. Twilighted means at the time of twilight, or you can say sunset or sunrise, but here it is sunset. Prick is the slightest amount, and dusk, uh, time of sunset. So, when Sadao said to General that he could swear upon his loyalty towards Japan and how enthusiastic he is to fight the enemy. So, just General, he was relaxed and said that Sadao was a good man. He closed his eyes and said that Sadao would be rewarded for his goodness. But Sadao says that he got his reward when at dusk he looked towards the island and saw no trace of torchlight. This meant that the American man had found a Korean fishing boat and had gone with it safely back home. Sadao did not doubt this as he had instructed the man to wait for a Korean fishing boat. He stood for a moment on the veranda gazing out to the sea from whence means where, the young man had come that other night, and into his mind, although without reason, there came other white faces he had known. So, here, when he was standing uh, in the veranda and recollected the past events. He looked at the sea from where the man had come that night. He had flashbacks of all the Americans he had met in his life. And who were they? The professor at whose house he had met Hannah. So firstly he remembered the dull professor at whose house he had met Hannah, and his wife had been a silly, talkative woman, and also remembers the professor's silly, talkative wife who was very kind to them. So he says that silly, talkative woman, in spite of her wish to be kind, means she was trying to be very kind to them. He remembered his old teacher of anatomy. So he also remembered his teacher of anatomy who had taught him to cut open the body with knife. Anatomy who had been so insistent on mercy with the knife. And then he remembered the face of his fat and slatternly landlady. Slatternly means untidy, dirty. So, after remembering his anatomy teacher, he remembered the fat, untidy landlady. Uh, he had great difficulty in finding a place to live in America because he was a Japanese. So, being a Japanese, Sadao had found uh, an accommodation in America with great difficulty, and their Americans, they were full of prejudice, and it had been bitter to live in it, knowing himself their superior. So as I said that it was Sadao found an accommodation in America with great difficulty, and he hated living there, knowing that the Japanese were superior to the American and still being treated like inferiors. So Sadao, he disliked that dirty old woman who finally agreed to let him live in her home, which was in a bad condition. So it says that how he had despised mean disliked the ignorant and dirty old woman who had at last consented, agreed to house him, to let him stay in her miserable home, means the house which was in a very poor condition. He had once tried to be grateful to her because she had in his last year nursed him through influenza, but it was difficult, for she was no less repulsive to him in her kindness. Now he remembered the youthful, haggard face of his prisoner, white and repulsive. Haggard means looking exhausted and unwell, especially from fatigue, worry, or suffering. So, as I said, firstly, he remembered his professor and also professor's talkative wife. Then he remembered his teacher of anatomy. And after that, he had memories of his untidy landlady to whom Sadao tried to be thankful because she had taken care of him when he was struck by influenza during the last year of his stay in America. It was difficult for Sadao to be thankful to her as he hated her, even though she was kind to him. And finally, Sadao remembered the weak face of the American prisoner. It was white in color and was terrible. Strange, he thought. I wonder why I could not kill him. So Sadao felt that it was strange that he could not kill his enemy. He wonders that why did he save the life of an enemy? He was trapped in a dilemma. What was that dilemma? That on one hand, he was a doctor and he had moral and ethical responsibility to save the wounded soldier, and on the other hand, he was a patriot and uh, he should let the enemy die or hand him over to the army. So here he fulfills his ethical responsibility. He saves the man. He risks his own life, his family, reputation, and then later, as a patriot, he planned to get him killed with the help of the army general, but later on he helped him escape, which reflects his true personality. His true personality means he doesn't like this act of destruction and killing, and he's a person who likes that there should be peace all around. All human beings should treat each other like brothers and sisters. There should be a feeling of brotherhood, there should be feeling of oneness, there should be feeling of togetherness and love amongst the people. So that is why he couldn't kill the enemy. And of course, on other hand also, he was a doctor, and doctors uh, feel this responsibility to save people and not let them die. With this, I come to an end of this chapter. I hope uh, you were able to understand it. If anything is not understood, you can ask me in the group. Thank you.